I want to introduce you to John Nielsen Gammon. I first heard him talk here in the Woodlands about 2 years ago, I guess, John. He holds a PhD from MIT. He joined the faculty at Texas A&M University in 1991, and then Governor George Bush appointed him as a Texas state climatologist, which he still does. He served as acting executive associate dean for the College of Geosciences, the chair of the American Meteorological Society Board on Higher Education, and the president of the International Commission for Dynamic Meteorology. He's a fellow of the American Meteorological Society, that's easy for me to say. Dr. Nielsen Gammon's research involves topics as jet stream, monitoring, heavy rains, sea breezes, air pollution, courses in weather analysis, weather forecasting, atmospheric dynamics, and climatology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Nielsen.
Apparently, one of Kathleen's selling points of the speaker is because she's upbeat. Most of the speeches I've been giving have been talking about drought, so I'm generally downer. But a funny thing happened on the way to the Woodlands Water Symposium. It rained. This is rainfall over the past couple of months across the south central United States. Anything that's in green or blue or purple is above normal rainfall. And not just southeast Texas, but also South Texas, West Texas, Northeast Texas have all benefited from quite a bit of rain in the past couple of months. If we look at longer time scales, say the past 6 months, similar sort of picture emerges. This is a measure of dryness or wetness compared to historical conditions. And you can see the places I mentioned as winners. The Panhandle has not been doing all that well recently, and much of central Texas is just getting by normal rainfall, which hasn't really improved the situation a lot, but hasn't made it worse either. Look at a longer time scale now, the past couple of years. Statewide, I guess it's been a little bit above average rainfall the past couple of years, but now you see some red popping up that highlights the Wichita Falls area that Kathleen spoke about. And saying basically over the past couple of years, the rainfall has been in the lowest 50th percentile compared to historical conditions, which is bad in and of itself, but that's just the last 2 years of what's been a 4.5-year drought. And the 2 years before that, let me remind people what 2011 and 2012 were like. So we've come a long way since then. And in fact, the next slide I'm going to show is a slide that I've been showing for about 2 years now that compares the severity of this drought statewide to the severity of droughts that the state has experienced historically since 1895. But this is the first time that the black line, which is the current drought, has actually made it above the zero line, which means that measured on a statewide basis, the drought has actually ended. As you've seen, it's transformed itself really from a statewide drought to a drought in particular parts of the state of Texas. But it's pretty rarely actually managed to get the whole state of Texas out of drought anyhow. So if we use this measure for the drought, and it's the second longest drought on record for the state of Texas. The one that goes out longer than that is the drought of the 1950s. One of the big differences between this drought and the drought of the 50s was we started off with the driest year of the drought back in 2011. The worst year of the 1950s drought was the last year of drought, and that made that drought quite a bit more devastating than it would have been if the order had been somewhat different. So in southeast Texas, we can look at this graph and be grateful. In places like Wichita Falls and the Panhandle, we can look at it and be jealous, because really you can't accurately summarize conditions across the state with a single number. You've seen this already, the U.S. Drought Monitor for current conditions, and it's consistent with the rainfall and drought index maps I've shown you. The fine print on the right says that right now about 35% of the state of Texas is undergoing drought conditions, including about 3% that's still in exceptional drought levels. And mainly, outside of the short-term dryness up in the Panhandle, mainly that's reflected in the low reservoir levels and low stream flow levels. This is a graph from the water data from Texas site that the Water Development Board produces, and it shows the black line is the reservoir storage capacity across the state, going back from the 1930s all the way to the present. Growing very slowly until the drought of the 50s, and then development cranked up quite a bit, 60s and 70s, a lot of infrastructure went in, and it's been fairly flat over the past 10 or 15 years. Meanwhile, the actual storage is the blue shading area, and it goes up and down with droughts. The drought of 2011 put this dip in, and at the present time, storage levels are indicated by that arrow. So this is another way of measuring statewide drought, and by this measure, we're still solidly within drought. Of course, it depends upon where you are. The reservoirs that are running low are mainly in central Texas, North Texas, South Texas, and West Texas. But East Texas, Southeast Texas are pretty much at or near capacity at this point. One of the big reasons Texas has a lot of drought is because we're unusually susceptible to variations of things going on in the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. By far the one people know about the most is El Nino and La Nina. This is the prototypical temperature pattern for that. We have warmer than normal temperatures with an El Nino stretching across from South America into the central Pacific, mainly right along the equator. With a La Nina, it's the same basic location, but sort of the opposite pattern with cold temperatures along the equator. And if anybody asks me why, I'll talk about that slide. But meanwhile, the consequence of that is the position of the jet stream gets affected, the position of waves along the jet stream gets affected, and if you compare the El Ninos and La Ninas to streaming records, go farther back even than our weather records, you find that when you get a La Nina, it tends to be dry in the southwest and south United States. With an El Nino, it tends to be wet. So the L in El Nino stands for extra liquid for us. The La is less aqua. It's a bilingual phenomenon. This is what's going on right now. The yellows are above normal temperatures in the tropical Pacific. Orange here, you can see Mexico up here in the upper right. Australia is down here in the lower left. And temperatures have been running above normal for almost a year now, but they're finally getting to be significantly above normal, which has started altering the pattern of rainfall in the tropics and thereby influencing the jet stream. And really, since the beginning of the year, we've had conditions that are what you'd expect with a weak El Nino, which is kind of cool and kind of wet. The way we predict and see what's going on with it is actually looking at the equivalent of under the hood, which is below the surface of the ocean. So here we are again with the Pacific Ocean from west to east, but now looking down from the surface to a depth of about 1,500 feet below the surface. And the colors indicate the water temperatures. And it's kind of shocking to see how cold the water is in the tropics. If you just go a couple hundred feet down, we're talking about water temperatures below 20 Celsius down to 10 Celsius. This would be 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you go to Tahiti and dip your toes in the water, don't dip them down more than a few hundred feet. But normally the warm water is piled up on the western end of the ocean because the here we see that the maximum depth of our water is over the Central Pacific, which is unusual. If we can look at how unusual it is by comparing this to normal conditions. And what we find is the temperatures are up to 6 degrees warmer than normal in just 100 meters below the surface. And that allows the water at the surface to stay warmer under the influence of wind and under the influence of upwelling. And that's what sustains and reinforces and builds an El Nino event. Another thing that we've been looking at for technical aspects is getting below normal temperatures out in the western Pacific, because that's really what allows the thunderstorm activity to move from one place to another. It's going to rain the most where the water is warmest. And the main problem with this El Nino as far as the consequences is that the atmosphere had taken a long time to respond, but now it finally is responding. As for the future, this is the official outlook from the Climate Prediction Center based on a whole bunch of tools. This covers the period from the present, which is about this, well, we're in March right now, so right about here. This goes all the way through to next summer. And we're looking at the temperatures compared to normal in the central tropics. Anything above 0.5, if it lasts long enough, 0.5 degrees, is considered an official El Nino. So we're in El Nino conditions right now. It's been declared an El Nino. And based on most of the forecasting tools available, it's going to stay El Nino and even intensify going into next winter before finally weakening. The size of the bars indicates the range of possibilities, so there's very little chance of it flipping to La Nina anytime soon. It may weaken to neutral. That's probably the most realistic worst-case scenario. The effects of El Nino are mainly during the winter time, because that's when our jet stream influences our weather. So this is going to be mainly just of academic interest during the summer. It will help reduce the likelihood of hurricanes, which is good. But then if this prediction holds true, then next winter we'll see another relatively cool, wet winter, which means for the places that are still down low reservoir levels, less evaporation, more water inflow, and perhaps we'll be able to eliminate the rest of the drought in the state if we're lucky. These are all the different forecast tools. I just wanted to show you the range of possibilities. Now the problem is that about this time last year, people were talking about having a big El Nino event. And this is what the forecast looked like back then. And what actually ended up happening are these black dots. So it was not quite as exciting as it turned out to be. So you can decide for yourself what's going to happen in the future, and you'll be wrong. But certainly the models that have the best track record are actually the ones at the upper end. That was true last year as well, unfortunately. But now you see that there's quite a bit of support under the surface of the ocean for this sort of intensifying El Nino forecast. So for those who like water in Texas, that's good. Eventually, of course, we flip over to the attitude where I wish it would stop raining and we start hating water for a while, and then the next drought comes along and we love it again. That's the way it goes. And the cycles come not just from El Nino and La Nina year to year, but also there's decadal scale variations. This is one in the Pacific Ocean. The index is positive for extended periods of time for decades on end, and then negative for decades on end. And down the bottom, I plotted the variations of rainfall in different regions of the state of Texas. And you can see that when this particular pattern is positive, we tend to be wet in the wintertime. This is December through March rainfall. Went negative in the 1950s, and yes, we did have a drought there, if we've spoken of. Positive in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of rain there, and now it's been negative recently, and we've, of course, seen relatively dry winters. The latest numbers are actually pretty strongly positive, but as you can see, it's not unusual to get one or two positive years in amongst the cluster of negatives, so it'll be a while before we can tell whether things are actually shifting back again. Based on past history, believes that after this El Nino ends, we'll be susceptible to the next drought starting up again. Summertime, our rainfall and weather comes from the Atlantic Ocean, and here the connection is not quite as solid, but there's a tendency for when the Atlantic Ocean is warm for us to be dry, which happened in the 50s. When the Atlantic Ocean is cool, we tend to be wet. That's the thunderstorms following the temperatures you get. If the Atlantic Ocean is cool, then thunderstorms can be over land. And if the Atlantic Ocean is warm, that's where all the action is. And of course, the Atlantic Ocean has been running relatively warm since 1995, and we've had a couple of wet summers during that interval, but most of the time it's been dry, and right now, every region of the state except one is seeing the past decade has been below normal rainfall. By the way, these horizontal lines are compared to normal. 100% of normal is the middle line. The next line up is 120%, 140%. So we're talking about variations of 20 to 40% of rainfall from one decade to the next in the state of Texas. And compared to most other parts of the world, that's huge. Fortunately, they don't all line up together very often. They did in the 1950s, and they have again recently. We were below normal on an annual basis. Over the long term, we actually see a bit of an upward trend in rainfall in the state. Don't know if that's just part of the noise or whether there's such a factor that's actually causing the rainfall to increase. So as a result of all of that, mainly the El Nino part, these are the seasonal forecasts from the Climate Prediction Center. Over on the left is rainfall. Green indicates above normal chances of above normal rainfall. On the right is temperature, red's being warmer than normal, blue's cooler than normal. And normally, when I show this chart or anything like that, I only show the first couple charts. This is the next 3 months. May through July. Next row is the 3 months after that, August through October. Below that, November through January next year, and then February through April. And by the time you get past 3 months or so, the map tends to start looking whiter and whiter because there's of course, the farther out you go, the less ability there is to forecast the average conditions. But here, because there's such a strong indication that El Nino is going to continue, the Climate Prediction Center is actually forecasting significant tilting of the odds going all the way through next winter and into next spring. For Texas, above normal rainfall and below normal temperatures, both of which help replenish water supplies. So, like I said at the beginning, I don't often get to actually leave people on an upbeat note, but I'm going to be able to do that this time. Very grateful to the weather for that. The temperatures and the rainfall are pretty well tied together in Texas. Here is an example from summertime. Rainfall from left to right, temperature from bottom to top. And in the summer, the wetter it is, the cooler it is. Wait, this is Texas. The wetter it is, the less oppressively hot it is. And if it's dry, then we actually get the very warm temperatures. This red dot up here is 2011, which set a record for warmth as well as lack of rainfall. The red dots are actually all the past decade's worth of values. The most recent value, 2014, was pretty close to normal, but most of these dots, whether it's been wet or dry, have been sort of on the top envelope of the cluster, which means that that's basically an indication of climate change that's been taking place. Temperatures have been slightly warmer than they would have been otherwise, given the amount of rainfall we got. The size of that change, since compared to the average over the past century, is only about 1 degree Fahrenheit, and that's small compared to what natural variability is, but it's systematic. You know, if all we had was natural variability, you'd know that a bad year for water would be followed eventually by a good year for water and so forth. What this trend indicates is that, as you've seen, there's not much change in rainfall that we can detect going forward, but temperatures going up means that evaporation is is going to become a bigger and bigger source of water loss, which reflects on the reservoir issue you heard about earlier, reflects on the stream flow, and combine that with the growing population, you probably will have reduced stream flow throughout the state of Texas, and consequences for coastal ecosystems as well. We'll just wrap up with some slides from climate model projections. You can take them or leave them. One reason to not believe them is they forecast a slight decrease of rainfall with global warming, and so far we've seen an increase in rainfall as the temperature's gone up. Whether or not the models are wrong, or whether that's a natural variability that's going to switch, we don't know. But natural variability is so large that this sort of change is not going to be significant or even noticeable, even if it does come true. Runoff is predicted not to change very much, even with that predicted drop in rainfall, because rainfall is going to become probably heavier because the moisture in the atmosphere goes up as the temperature goes up. So each downpour can have a little more rain drop on to the surface because of it. But evaporation means, and that sort of spottiness of rainfall means that soil moisture will probably decline. The particular numbers I wouldn't put much faith in, but certainly the sign of the tendency, I do believe that soils will be drier in the future, and that means that plants and ecosystems will be getting by with what will seem like less water, even if the rainfall stays about the same. So to summarize, we've gone from a situation with Texas being in drought to a situation where we have drought within the state of Texas, but not affecting the bulk of the state, fortunately. You're seeing El Nino is likely to persist through next winter, which means cool and wet conditions, especially during the cooler part of the year when it has the biggest influence. And the longer term things, we've been in this period of drought susceptibility for about 10 to 15 years now because of the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. That may be over now if we're real lucky. Probably we're at least past the halfway point on that. So my expectation would be we'll still have one or two more droughts before the long-term patterns become favorable again. And that means rainfall 120% of the normal for a sustained period of time in the winter especially. For another, who knows, 10, 20, 30 years, and then we get to the dry side again. So the cycle of rainfall on the long term is pretty much equivalent to the water infrastructure cycle, which means you have these periods of drought and you build up infrastructure, and it's all in place during the wet period, and you wonder, why did you go through all that? And so you stop building infrastructure. And then the next drought comes along and you're back where you were before, and unfortunately, we've never seemed to catch up quite. Hopefully this past drought has got people's attention as to what actually can happen, so we'll be certain that when something like this does happen again, which because it's Texas it will, we'll be ready for it. Last speaker, I'll leave my contact information. Third bullet is the state climatologist website, and the last one is actually a climate change forum with a bunch of scientists and policymakers talking about different ideas regarding